So Says Shernoff.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of So Says Shernoff, right here on Fight. I am your host, Josh Shernoff, and today we have a real fun one for you. We are going to be talking about music in pro wrestling. To me, music and professional wrestling go hand in hand, and it's amazing to think that only 30-something, 40-something years ago, there really wasn't much music in wrestling. But now that has obviously changed. Music is it is woven into the fabric of sports entertainment and professional wrestling in general. It helps to elicit the emotions that we feel when we watch pro wrestling. And sometimes when people go from one company to another, the music has to change, and that can really negatively affect their presentation. We just saw Cody Rhodes leave AEW, debut at WrestleMania back with the WWE, and I was blown away to hear his theme song that he'd been using post WWE for the last 6 years. The fact that they're using that and that he was able to present himself in the way that he had been presenting himself everywhere else was huge to me. I think it's huge to the presentation of his character in general moving forward with WWE, and kind of brings the entire wrestling world together in a way, because you now have, in some senses, AEW's Cody Rhodes in WWE. And I'm not sure that was the intent, but that's definitely how it feels. And I mean that in the best way. I also happen to have my own theme song for this show, which was new this season, and it was created by a gentleman named Kiernan. And I thought, if I'm going to talk to somebody about wrestling and music, why not bring on the guy who actually created my theme? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kiernan. Thank you so much for being here, John.
Thank you for having me. It is me. It is I, the composer of the So Says Shernoff theme. That was a cool
Top of
theme,
your
and
resume.
Thank you for asking me.
Oh,
Absolutely.
man. Thank you. That, you know what, I had used for the first 3 seasons of this show, I had used a variation of the theme song that I had when I used to be a wrestler, and which was a couple of friends of mine put that together, a guy named Matt Fonda and Candace Harris. The two of them put this song together, and always liked it. And so when I was doing my own show, I thought, well, why not? I'll use that. But that was back in, that's, God, many more years ago than I'd like to remember. But at this point, it's, 15 years old, and I'm looking at it going, all right, that's it's a wrestler theme. It doesn't match well, but I still like the beat. I like the tune. So I sent it to you and said, here's what I've been using. Can you, don't redo this, just can you just make something new, something that fits the show, something that fits my personality? And you knocked out of the park. You were like, hey, any feedback? And I think my feedback was like, oh, can we move where it says So Says Shernoff, just because I already had the video and I wanted to make sure it matched up with when the logo came out. And you're like, oh yeah, absolutely. And that was it. So man, knocked it out of the park. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. I try to keep it as easy as I can for anybody that I work with. And the thing is, you said that the other piece of music that you were using was when you were a wrestler, and now it's for everything else that you're doing here, because you do a lot of different things. So, people evolve over time. And one thing that I'll always say is, if you have music that you use and you resonate with and that people identify with you, their music can always be an evolution, and you can always have some thematic material, whether it's like, oh, the style's the same, or if there's like a melody or two, okay, cool, take that and let's expand on it in the next thing. So try to make it as easy as possible, but also as collective as possible, I should say.
No, and it really, I love it. I think it works perfectly with our show here. I even used, the first thing I used it for was for my action figure commercial. Had it in the background there. So it worked perfectly. And I'm just waiting for some promotion that I do commentary for to decide they'd like to announce me out for the show as opposed to just having me sit there when it begins. Hint to WrestlePro. But anyway, so I wanted to talk to you, though, not about my theme music, but about wrestling themes in general, because I think that that's a topic that everyone has an opinion on. There's a lot in wrestling that some people can go, I don't really care either way. There is no one who is a wrestling fan who doesn't have at least one song that meant something to them or mattered to them or that they were a fan of or they thought was terrible or whatever. So I had mentioned earlier, one of the hot topics right now was coming off of Cody Rhodes' return to the WWE. I know personally for myself, I was shocked when I heard the wrestling has more than one royal family and then kicking into his what many consider AEW theme. Now, of course, he used it in Ring of Honor and on the Indies and whatnot. So it was his post-WWE theme. And I had kind of just been assuming we were going to be getting maybe a redone version of the Smoke and Mirrors or something else like that. But, man, so much of the music is that presentation, and the fact that he was able to come back to the WWE in the AEW Cody Rhodes presentation really mattered. And I can remember back to the after WCW closed and how important I felt it was that Booker T came out to that same music he'd been using since Harlem Heat. And it was just, there's some songs, it's the idea of, it's what to me never worked with Bret Hart in WCW, among many other things. But whatever, I think he went through multiple musics as they tried to just find the right thing for him. And it just never hit the way that it did in WWE with his theme song there. So what's your thought in general as somebody who, and list off some of the people, Brian Myers, Mercedes Martinez, some of the other people, Tony Nese, who you've been creating music for that people can hear now. And of course, we'll make sure by the end of this, we've plugged everywhere that people can listen to it. But I wanted to make sure that we kind of let everybody know what's your background, and then what are your opinions on wrestling themes?
Sure. So a little bit of background. I work both independently with talents as well as I'm the in-house composer for the United Wrestling Network. So if you're familiar with Chris Dickinson, with Fred Rosser, who's gone through there, Max Caster has been through there. I haven't done a theme for Max Caster, but just to give you some insight as to who has walked through those Hallow halls as well. I am grateful to say that I've worked with people who work in every company outside of WWE. Actually, who is it? The Notorious Mimi actually just got signed, Sloane Jacobs, to WWE. And when she was the Notorious Mimi, I'd done her theme too. To this day, I've written I think it's over 110 themes in about 2 years. And yeah, you'll hear music all over the place. One of the recent ones that I'm really proud of is with my buddy Montesi. We worked on a track for Dragon Lake. And that one actually just came out. So he used that at AAA against that. Him and his brother Drilistico used that against FTR. So that was really cool to see. So at AAA, you all of a sudden saw them coming out to our theme. That was awesome. But yeah, you'll hear my music all around. For AEW people, you may be familiar with, as you stated, Mercedes Martinez, Tony Nese, Marina Shafir's new theme that she's using on Dynamite. They cut the song just to use the intro, but right after that intro comes in this beautiful violin suite that she had requested, and that's super cool. So if you get to check out the whole track, check that out. Some other people, PJ Black I've worked with, Chris Dickinson, like I said, Masha Slamovich has just an absolutely crushing track over on Impact, and one that I believe they're going to start using is for John Schuyler. So there's so many people I could just list down, which is really just, I'm so grateful to be able to say that. But yeah, if you go to any promotion, you'll be able to hear some of my music there too. So it's just really cool to see.
So every musician has a sound to them, right? Whether you're thinking somebody you listen to on the radio, or we go back to, Jim Johnston from WWF music. There's a sound to it there that you can kind of, maybe it's their choice of instrument that they use, or maybe it's I'm not sure what it is but there is a unique sound. Having said that, there's also the ability to, you have some musicians where every song you go, okay, this could be any of their songs. And then you have the musicians where, yeah, there's a theme through it because it's created by the same person, but everything is so incredibly unique. And that's what I found with you, in the sense that you could point to, I'm sure, similar instruments in my theme song and Brian Meyer's theme song. They sound nothing alike. There's no way, I don't think, that anyone would be able to go, oh, clearly those were made by the same person. And that, to me, is so impressive that I think it's not overstated enough, because that's something that I think we all remember with, if you think about like the Big Boss Man theme back in the day, right? And think of another theme that from that time period, the Legion of Doom. I believe, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, let's say those were both created by the same person. They don't sound anything the same. There's no similarity. So how do you do that? It's my long-winded way of asking you, how do you do that? How do you, when you're sitting down, you only have so many instruments. How do you put this together so that each song is unique to the talent?
Sure. So it's actually a couple of different answers, but one thing I'll always say is, early in my career, I used to consider myself more of a guitarist, more of a band guy, right? And guitar is what I always call every musician has kind of a parent instrument and a parent style, right? So for me, I could write basically anything on guitar and then figure it out on other instruments. And then I would say I'm more of a rock and metal person myself, but I've always strive to be more of a composer than a guitarist, if that makes sense. So for me, it's always about what's going to serve the song more so than what's going to serve the need of the band, right? And then that translates into the second part of it, which is every talent is unique, right? So when I reach out to talents or people reach out to me, a lot of the questions that I ask are, even if I know the talent, even if the talent has been on TV for 15, 20 years, I'll still reach out to them and say, hey, I know who you are, or I don't know who you are, but how do you want to be portrayed? What do you want the audience to know about you before you hit the ring? And, part of it for me is when you really dive deep into that, you start to see the differences between different talents, right? And I bring this up when I speak to people, is it's easy to write for somebody, or I don't want to say easy, but it's easier to write to somebody who has more of a defined gimmick, right? So for example, let's say I'll bring up Bray Wyatt as an example, because Bray Wyatt is all I say is Bray Wyatt, and you know who I'm talking about. You know, sure, the vibe, whether it's the cult leader version or whether it's the Fiend, whatever, right? But when you have somebody who is just a very good wrestler, somebody who's just, hi, my name is X and I'm a good wrestler, sometimes you could fall into the trap, if you're not careful, of, like you said, creating the same song that you did for somebody else, because it's right. Like, okay, cool, you're just a good wrestler. But if you go ahead and you dive into some of these finer points, you find out more about them. Okay, who are they? They're more of an MMA style person. Okay, this person's a vegan. Okay, this person, has these attributes. They're more into the fantasy realm of things. So you can start pulling those little characteristics out of just that small conversation. And when you do that, you're able to find different inspirations, so to speak. And I think that that's really powerful. I think a lot of people kind of look at entrance themes and they go, oh, it's wrestling, so it can either be, a hip hop track or like right. a really heavy track, without thinking, no, the thing is, the music is the score, not to the TV show, but to the individual wrestler, right? Like if that was the case, then everybody holding a sword in Lord of the Rings could just go ahead and have a rock or metal track and it would be fine. Now, what do we say about all those movies that have that? We're like, oh, it didn't really fit, and right. we don't like those. But we watch Lord of the Rings and we're like, this is totally of the time, most of the time, and this is just one of the most epic, grandiose things I've ever seen and felt in my life. That's exactly how it should be when you hear somebody's theme.
So that's fascinating to hear. So looking back on some themes from the past, because I wanted to talk to you, I wanted to kind of have a conversation with you about wrestling themes in general. Sure. And I thought it was important that we establish why your opinion matters to the fans that are watching this to make sure they knew who you were. My opinion matters because it's my show called So Says Shernoff. And if you don't want to hear my opinion, well, yeah, I was going to say, if you don't want to hear my opinion, why are you watching this show that is very clearly based on me just speaking into a void and forcing people like yourself on here to listen to me? So what were some of your themes growing up? Were you a wrestling fan growing up, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. My brother James was probably the person who not probably, he is the person who really got me into wrestling when I was younger.
Okay.
And the first match I ever saw was Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, WrestleMania 12. And that was the Iron Man match, right?
What a start.
Think about, I know. And I can't even remember how old I was. I was obviously single digits at that time. But at the same time, you sit there and it's like, oh, it's an hour-long Iron Man match. What kid is going to sit through that? But to me, seeing Shawn Michaels come down from the rafters and then just seeing the whole thing, like Shawn Michaels to me is probably one of the best wrestlers of all time. And by extension, has one of the best themes of all time. And, you know, that was my start into the world of wrestling. But for me, his theme is definitely one of the best. Kurt Angle's is one of the best. My top theme of all time is Kane's original theme. And, you know, everyone will go like, oh, The Undertaker or Stone Cold. Stone Cold's was definitely great. And The Undertaker's was and still is one of the best. But for me, it was whenever you heard that initial organ, you didn't have to hear anything else to know what was about to happen. Everybody in the ring was going to regret every life choice they've ever made to get them to that point. And it was perfect. And I love all of his other themes afterwards, which everything obviously replicated off of or built off of.
Sure.
But that first one, Burned, was just like, it was perfect. Most people aren't going to use an organ in wrestling, kind of like I'm saying. But you think about the whole context. You think about him being burned. You think about, what was it? You think about where he came from. You think about all these different connections. And it was just probably the most evil sounding thing in the world. That scared me when I was younger. And then as I got older, I was like, that's what it was supposed to do, ding dong.
Yeah.
So I'm just all right.
Great point, though, because the organ had that. So it'd be one... I guess it was 4 different before it kicked in, like 4 different times hitting that organ there. And it gave you that first chord, that first note that you heard. Yeah, instantly you knew who was coming out. But what I loved about that theme, and I'm glad you mentioned it, what I loved about it was the 3 other notes. Because now you know, and you're watching whoever it is in the ring, and you're looking at the crowd and you're feeling this, and the announcers are even, especially in his original run, when he first debuted, you'd hear that first one and the announcer would be, oh God, oh no, here he comes, you know? And now there's this like suspense where you're almost trapped. Like, well, he's coming. We know that he's on his way out here. Just sit and get ready to take it. Like that's kind of, it was so beautifully done. And then on the other side of it, you have something like a Stone Cold Steve Austin with the glass. The glass breaks and instantly the crowd goes crazy. So if you think about that, the pop that you're getting from the crowd is not even his song as it is the sound of breaking glass, because that crowd is going nuts before the music even starts. And then the music is just pretty much, I mean, during the Attitude Era, that was just the soundtrack of Steve Austin. That was so many times where he wouldn't even be having a match and that music would just be playing. So, yeah, I mean, Shawn Michaels is an interesting one. Also one of my favorites of all time. And something I find fascinating, and I wonder if you've, experienced this in the 100+ songs that you've written, which is, in the last 2 years is unbelievable. But Shawn Michaels' music, and of course, it began with Sensational Sherry singing and then moved on to Shawn Michaels singing. But his music, it shouldn't be cool. It shouldn't be badass, but it is. Like, and I feel you're nodding. I mean, you agree with me, right? It's like
I do.
It is such a badass song that, for all intents and purposes, there is no aspect of that song that should make you go like, man, I'm pumped up now. Like, I'm just a sexy boy. I'm not your boy toy. That is what this grown man is singing. And
Hmm.
Explain that in your opinion. Explain, how is that possible?
Yeah, so for me, it really details the wrestler, right? And talents will ask me sometimes, "Oh, are you going to add lyrics, or do we want lyrics?" And it really varies on the wrestler, and it varies on where they are. Sometimes I feel like lyrics might get in the way
Mhm.
because if you have commentary and you're on TV, sometimes you're not going to hear all of that, right? But the thing is, at the end of the day, Shawn Michaels is this, just at least back in the day, was this guy that if he was a babyface, everybody loved him.
Mhm.
And he was that guy that, if we think about it, all the girls wanted to be with. He was that guy that if you read the lyrics as a babyface for him and you showed him to someone in the audience, they'd be like, "Oh my God, this is the guy like I want to be with," kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
But then if he was a bad guy, if he was a heel, then everybody's just like, "These are the worst lyrics in the world," and this guy is totally just showboating. Like, it
Right.
totally, everything fit exactly who he was. And the thing is, think, who is it? It's Shawn Michaels. Of course he would sing his own theme,
Right.
right? Like, if you think about it and think about the character he was doing at the time, of course he wouldn't bring somebody in to do it. And of course the initial person would be this kind of shrieky, sensational Sherry.
Uh-huh.
And then he would be like, "Listen, this song's about me. This is for me. Step aside, dude. I got this." Like that, it just embodied Shawn Michaels so well. And then I will say that solo in the middle is dope. It's a dope
Okay,
solo.
I will say,
So
I said
that's
earlier
gonna
there is
get
no
over.
part that's badass that solo is. If you removed all the lyrics and everything, that solo itself is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I also, for me, Bret Hart's theme, which of course was a redone version of the original Hart Foundation theme. And I loved Bret Hart's theme. I thought it was incredible. So AEW recently just released a new theme for the Owen Hart Foundation tournament.
Yes.
Tell me about that. Just,
Yeah. I
man.
posted this over on Twitter when it came out. And number one, Mikey's been great, and he's putting out a lot of bangers
Yeah.
with AEW and Ring of Honor and everything. The one thing I will say with that theme, I forget how I worded it on Twitter, but I was just like, this is the way that you honor the legacy of Owen Hart, but create a modern version and a
Yeah.
modern take of something so iconic and make it your own. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that I think would see the original Owen Hart theme and would be like, "All right, cool, just stick with that." But
Yeah.
the thing is, you hear how much respect it was paid, but you also hear that now it's 2022. We have different sounds. We have, different things that we can do with it. And it was just taken into this century. And I thought that it couldn't have been done any better.
No, I really was impressed with it. And that kind of brings me back to, I talked earlier about, Booker T coming over with his music, but Bret Hart going to WCW and how terrible his music was. Why? I mean, I'm not going to say, why do you think their music was so bad at times? I mean, it was what it was.
Sure.
Some of it was stock music. Some of it was cool, but it just didn't have that same ring to it. But AEW has managed to do the opposite. Whereas I feel like AEW's music is really, there is so much like your own. There's so much thought put into it. Whereas I feel like WWE has slipped a little bit. Still great music, but I feel like it's slipped that the individuality isn't there in as many of these themes. And maybe it's because they just have too much talent. But the individuality isn't there in the same way. What is your thought on that? Like, as far as wrestling themes in general, you had mentioned the difficulty of when you have a wrestler and they're just a wrestler and that's what it is. Or you have like let's say like a Rhea Ripley, right? Like, cool theme, kind of matches her, but it's not like, I couldn't hum it to you. Like, I don't really know what it is. And, I just, do you think that, I don't know what their process is, but have you heard themes where you listen to it and you went like, man, they just made a theme. Like they didn't look into it and say, hey, who is this person? What's their,
Yeah, and I might say something fairly controversial, but I'm
Go for
kind
it.
of okay with it. I think that there is, and I've said this, I don't know if I've said this publicly before, but I've always felt that there's a difference between a composer and a producer. And oftentimes, sometimes those get blurred, and especially in the music industry and the audio
Mhm.
industry, sometimes you have to wear many hats, right? You're not just a wrestling entrance theme song composer. You also do film, you also do commercial music, you also
Sure.
do session work. So, you also play in pit orchestras, things like that. So sometimes you can have these different skill sets which either fit or don't fit together. Producing music sometimes and composing music can oftentimes be two separate things. Sometimes they could be similar, but I do feel like if you come more so from kind of a production background and you're more producer than what I would consider composer, kind of take, for example, Jim Johnston, I consider to be a composer, and that's why he sounded so unique. It wasn't that it had the Jim Johnston sound, it was that every theme generally that he put out, the majority of them, they did fit the talent more so than they did not. Even if it was like, okay, cool, you're in the 2000s, and then you have the Rob Conway theme. Everyone always takes a dump on that theme, but that was a great theme
I thought
for,
it was
yeah,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, it was great for him, right? But and like the Fandango theme was him too. Also, End of Days for Baron Corbin was him, and then he had Tommy Vex come in on that. So, to be able to have that range, I think is extremely important because each wrestler
Mhm.
should be their own movie, and the music that you put to it, like I said earlier, should be the score. And I think a lot of people who come into this new world of music who have access to all of this technology and all of these amazing sounds oftentimes are just like, yo, here's a string pad and let's go ahead and launch it, and if we go ahead and we do staccato strings here, it's going to sound really good. And yes, the production of it sounds good, but you might turn around and all of a sudden the audio quality is what's accelerated, but the compositional quality leaves something to be desired. So I've always thought that when you do something like this, especially when it's for TV or it's somebody whose character moves between, different programs or different organizations, you need to think as a composer. Okay, cool. What is this person's movie? What is this person's motivation? Where do we see them going? And if you take that filter, it's less so, or you're going to have more success in composing a piece rather than just creating a really great piece of music. And if we listen back to some of Jim Johnston's music, some of it doesn't, from an audio engineering standpoint, hit you the hardest, break your speakers. It doesn't always do that.
Sure.
But you always go, oh man, I remember that. That's like this vibe. If you just listen to a lot of themes that were written by Jim Johnston and even some of mine and Mikey's, you end up hearing, okay, this is what this person probably is. If I could at least put together an image of that. I also think that with someone like WWE having so many talents that are revolving through the door, it's a matter of why invest. I think it's kind of counterproductive, but why invest so much time in one piece of music if you don't know the long span idea of how long someone's going to be around?
Right. Like we've seen like
So
a Damian Priest recently updated his theme.
right.
So yeah, there's something to that. I want to go back to, you had mentioned Kurt Angle's theme as being one of your favorites. And Kurt Angle's theme had been used by, if I'm not mistaken, two people prior to Kurt Angle. It was used originally for the Patriot, and then I believe was used at least once for Sergeant Slaughter. So is that an instance where, because for you as a composer, it kind of almost flies in the face of the common sense theme of okay, well, let's take a look at Kurt Angle and who is Kurt Angle, whatever. This is a theme that was created for, as far as I know, for the Patriot, and it had that nice thing to it. And when the Patriot came out, it was okay. It's music, makes sense. And for some reason, Kurt Angle, that song that wasn't created with him in mind, is the complete embodiment of that Kurt Angle character and persona and personality. Can you think of any other themes? Have you ever worked on something? We've heard stories also. AJ Styles' theme in WWE was originally created for somebody else, and then it was used, then it was ended up being used for him. Same thing with, I believe I'd heard, and I don't know who, but I heard that the Glorious song for Bobby Roode was
Right.
created for somebody else and then ended up
Yeah.
going to him. Have you ever created a song? Maybe you're working on a song for a talent and you're just like, this isn't doing it. This isn't working. All right, let's start from scratch. But then 2 months later, you're working on a song for another talent and you go, well, wait a minute, that song that I wrote for this other guy that didn't work out, that's the one for them. Has anything like that ever happened to you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you were referring to was, I think AJ Styles' theme was going to be for James Storm.
James Storm, yeah.
And then I think that Nakamura's theme, I think it was going to be Glorious, was going to go to Nakamura. At least that's the rumor that I heard.
Really? Wow.
I'm so happy that they did Rising Sun, because again, that theme is just absolutely perfect. And if you think of Subconscious from New Japan, it's kind of nice to see a little bit of like at least instrumental tie back to that, like not
Right. An
acknowledgement
acknowledgement to it, yeah.
Right. And yeah, I'll say that there have definitely been themes that I've worked on where you have talents that, share a similar space, right? Especially when it comes to things that are more superhero-esque, or it comes to things that are a little bit more of a, what I would say, like cult leader-esque or more evil-esque,
Sure.
those kinds of things, right? In terms of have I ever, and I know what you're asking, I've never had an instance yet where I've taken a theme that I've worked for somebody else and given it to somebody else, but I definitely foresee something like that could happen. Again, sometimes if you are in wrestling, you have a similar headspace that you do populate with other people in kind of like that genre. So it definitely can happen.
Have you had songs where experiences where it's been rejected by the talent? And I don't mean in necessarily like a mean, negative way, in a hurtful way, but where you've worked on a song and because like we talked about before, you created my song and sent it to me like, hey, what are your thoughts and feedback? And I was like, you're done. Like, that's it. Like this is the song.
Sure.
I can't imagine that every single one is as easy as that was. Or maybe it was. Maybe you're just that good. So have you ever had an instance like where you finished a song and said, hey, I feel really good about this, and the talent's just like, man, I'm sorry, this is nowhere. This isn't what I'm envisioning?
Well, let me kind of put a couple of different things out there. And I shout out Mikey Ruckus a couple of times in this interview, because I don't think anybody understands how, when he says, oh, I came up with this theme in like a day or an hour or things like that, how realistic that is, because sometimes, again, like there are things that we do to help us speed up the process, but sometimes you don't want things leaking out. So sometimes you only have that short amount of time to throw things together. So, if you've never written a piece of music before, to turn around and be like, oh, okay, cool, it's probably easy to write a piece of music in a day or an hour. No, it's not. Gratefully, I often have a little bit more time to work with talents because I work more on a one-on-one independent basis for right now. And what ends up happening is a lot of the times, number one, the vetting process I go through with the wrestler, sending me references and getting to know them, usually makes that initial hit much easier. And through the process, I keep sending them different updates to the track. Okay, cool. What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Usually I'll send them like a 30-second rough of like, here's the direction I'm thinking. Do you like this? If you don't like this, then we'll go in a different direction. And sometimes talents are like, that's awesome, keep going. And then we develop it. Other times talents will be like, well, can we do this? And we go in a different direction. So I've never had somebody that's outright been like, yo, dude, this sucks. Like, what are you doing? Quit your life. But like, I've definitely had wrestlers who have been like, let's take this in a little bit of a different direction. I want it to really, I don't feel that this one defines me yet. And we've gotten there. So. Yeah.
And it's a challenging thing for someone who is, their levels of creativity. And I deal with this, like right now I'm wearing a custom tie, which was actually created for WrestleMania, but it says, So Says Shernoff in the logo there. But
that's awesome.
I'm obviously known for having all of these custom ties and that I wear. There have been times where I have gone to the artist that I work with and I've said to her, I want like literally like I want it to be exactly like this here, exactly like that there, over there, and then she does it and I'm blown away and it's amazing and it looks better than even what I had in my head. And then there are times where I like can't. There are times where I'll say like, hey, can you just incorporate a couple things, and she makes something incredible. But then there are times where I can't articulate what I'm visualizing. And I feel like, so the creativity is there on my end in the sense that I've created it in my head and it looks great. And it's going to be a wonderful looking tie. But I can't articulate that. And then the artist that I happen to work with for my ties, she's so talented. And I think, we've built such a rapport over the last few years. And she had done my wrestling gear before, but we've built a rapport enough that I think she's learned how to almost read my mind, where I'm like struggling to try and explain like what this vision is that I just can't get out. And she's able to create it. And I think that for someone like you fall on the side of where she is in the, you can create it. You have the ability. And what fascinates me, and not just to blow smoke here, but what fascinates me with your talent is that not only are you able to create something really cool, but you are able to take something that someone is hearing in their head and has no idea how to put it out there into the world, and you're able to do that on their behalf. And I think that that's really cool. And I think that musicians who do what you do maybe don't get enough credit for how, I won't even say how difficult, but the level of talent you have to be able to achieve something like that. So kudos to you for being able to do that. You. But yeah, it is. And like Mikey, like, man, unbelievable some of the stuff that he has put out there. Again, Sting comes to mind, where, I mean, he had such, if you were around for the 97 era Sting, it was an iconic theme. Of course, later on he went to Seek and Destroy at some point in WCW. But if you were, that theme was so iconic to him. WWE had a pretty cool theme for him, but it never like spoke to me in the same way as a fan that his AEW theme does. And so I guess kind of my last question for you is, how important, you hear people talk all the time in wrestling about the importance of, with the writers, where they always go, oh, you shouldn't have Hollywood writers. You have to have writers who are wrestling fans. And for the record, I agree with that. I think don't write for something you don't hire me to write for Downton Abbey. Right? Like, I don't know what the hell I'm like, what are you doing? But there are certain things that I can write for. So,
one thing I will say is, first off, talents really are good at saying, like, I don't know what I'm talking about, so, like, let me just keep sending you things, and let me just, like, one of my favorite guitarists ever, this guy, Jeff Loomis, he's from the band called Nevermore, and now he's an arch enemy. He would always say, like, oh, when I write music, I just throw on my voice memo for an hour, and I just run through things, just whatever my hands want to do. And he's like, there could be, like, 50 minutes of crap, but if there's, like, 10 minutes of gold there, that's really what I'm going to keep and develop into something. And, sometimes something hits right away. Sometimes you have to keep going through ideas. And the thing is, as a composer, you don't want to be the kind of person that's like, well, I don't know what the hell you want me to do. Like, you don't want to be like that. You also, what you want to be empathetic. You want to be able to speak to somebody and be like, all right, cool. Instead of like, do you like this? That's such like a bad question to ask. It's more just like, hey, what do you think of this? And then if they start giving feedback, you're like, all right, cool. Are there certain, let's talk a little bit about what I just sent you. Does the vibe fit? Because maybe you wrote something that, like, from an instrumental standpoint will work, but maybe it's too fast or maybe it's too slow or something like that. There are things that you can ask to really get the talent to draw a little bit more of what they're talking about. And if you ask the right questions and you're doing your job as a composer, very few and far between are the talent's going to be like, okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know what I want, but I don't want that. So like, you got to do a lot of the onus is on the composer. The talent just knows that they want something really dope that fits them. So, it's your job as the composer to draw all that out.
And so I said before this would be my last question for you, but I actually have two more. So there's always the exception to prove the rule, but do you believe, and that the largest exception would be Jim Johnston, and the fact that he was not a wrestling fan.
Yeah.
But do you think in generally speaking, there is value, especially this day and age where things are a little different because there were characters. There were such larger than life characters back in the day that he could create music for a character, not having to create music for a wrestler. Do you think if you're creating music for wrestlers today that it would be ideal if you were a fan? Because I think that with the new Sting theme, I think that you hear the fan, the same of what he did with the Owen Hart one that we talked about earlier. You hear the fan who remembers and appreciates and knows what emotions can come from the previous song and knows how to put those in. Do you think that that's important?
I think it depends on the wrestler too, because we talk about Sting. And again, Sting is a very easy example to go to because he's had such a long career. So we know the themes he's had over time, right? But think about somebody like, let's think about like a newer wrestler, right? Like a Tatum Paxley, hypothetically, right?
Okay.
She hasn't really had a long career. She's basically been in WWE for a short amount of time. There's not really much you can pull from her that people are going to know or understand. You could do something with the Hardy Boys, right? But they got loaded. That's totally cool. With Samoa Joe, he had such a long lineage that the piece that was created for him, you could do a lot with. So I think it really depends on the talent that you're working with. I think that as a composer, you don't necessarily have to be a wrestling fan, but you do have to be very tied in to what your role is in the entire process, right? Your role is to create a piece of music that is going to exemplify and amplify the talent, right? So you're not going to create a track that's just a rock track for somebody that, it doesn't exemplify them. You wouldn't put a Foo Fighters song with Fandango is kind of what I would say,
right?
And so that's kind of the way I would look at it. But I don't think that you have to be a wrestling fan for that. But I feel like if you are a wrestling fan, then you can get some of those other things and pull some of that thematic material for wrestlers that have a deeper catalog. And for newer wrestlers, then again, it's really, I'm grateful to have been a wrestling fan, so I kind of know what to look for. But if I wasn't a wrestling fan, but I was a composer, it would be the same thing as scoring a movie or scoring a short film.
And my last question for you, and I appreciate you being on here and talking to me about this, and it's just a fun topic, and to get to talk to somebody who has the talent that you have about this stuff is really cool. Starting back in high school, I had, like most people, had a high school band, and there was a time in my life, even in my adult life, that I was a singer-songwriter and played some guitar and did stuff like that. And I always had I would say my favorite band of all time, Bare Naked Ladies. Just
there you go.
Love Bare Naked Ladies. And that influenced me to the point where most of my songs had a very Bare Naked Ladies sound to them. Sure. But I don't exclusively like Bare Naked Ladies. I like music that sounds absolutely nothing like them. However, when I would write music, I just could not. If I sat down and said, today I'm writing a song that sounds like Oasis.
Sure.
I couldn't do it. At the end of it, it's going to sound like a Bare Naked Ladies style song. And I don't mean that to say that my music was ever the quality of Bare Naked Ladies, but I'm saying it's going to be that same sound. How do you... Is it more of the education in music? How do you sit down and write music for all of these different genres and not have it go, okay, so he does heavy metal, but so yeah, he was trying this poppy thing, so now it sounds like heavy metal trying to be pop. No, like when you do it, no, it sounds like pop, and then this sounds like heavy metal. So how do you do that? Is that just knowledge, like a deeper knowledge of composing?
For me, when I went to school for music, and one thing is, obviously I have a kind of deep understanding of music theory and things like that, but the one thing that I always learned about composing, especially wanting to create a career in it, was that one thing that's important is you have to be able to analyze any music, whether it's, if you're going into somewhere where you're reading sheet music, you got to do that. Reading sheet music isn't always one of my strong points, but it's something that I can do. But if you're listening to a song, picking out, okay, what kind of chords are going on? Are they using, standard triads? Are they doing extensions, this and that? How are the rhythms going? What instrumentation is there? If you can listen to a piece of music and break it apart into its simplest forms, and you can figure out, okay, here's what makes this style, or this artist, then you can turn that around and go, okay, cool. How do I do that with the tools that I have? Right. So instead of it being like, okay, cool, like you said, a heavy metal guy doing heavy metal guy trying to write a pop track, it's more like, okay, cool, this pop track actually has all of this stuff going on. So leave the metal stuff for when you got to do metal. Here's what you got to do to be right in the pipeline of, this style or pop or, this kind of song. So I think it's always about leaving the things where they are. And then you'll always have little things that are from kind of your parent style that you'll throw in, right? Like if you're a jazz guy, you might do some more chromatics and other things, but you won't be like, oh, it's a jazz guy doing pop. It's going to be like more, oh, it's musical. And it's adding this part here. So being able to analyze music for me is probably one of the most important things. Break it down to its bare basics, research and learn about different styles of music, and learn to love the things that make each style unique. Also, I say this all the time to different people, country, rap, and metal and pop punk, you could find in all these different styles similar chord progressions and things, but then you can find the things that make them different too. So if you find the things that you really like about different styles of music, you'll find that you have a deeper appreciation for the music itself, and then you'll want to break it apart even more, as opposed to being like, God damn it, I got to analyze this piece now. So it makes it that much easier if you can find the things that you love about each style, but really be able to break down everything into its smaller sum parts.
Well, I know this is supposed to be a show about wrestling, but I found all of that fascinating. So thank you very much.
Of course,
John Kiernan, thank you for being on here. The coolest part, I want to let you get back, by the way, to sitting out in the sun, those palm trees behind you. But thank you so much. The coolest part of this is you are now the only person in the history of the last 4 seasons of my show and any episode moving forward. I'm pretty sure you're the only one who, when I say thank you and throw to a commercial break, it will be your song that you created playing us out. So John Kiernan, thank you so much. Let everybody know where they can find you before we let you go.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music. Just search John Kiernan. You can find me at johnkieranmusic@gmail.com if you're a wrestler that's looking for some custom entrance music. johnkieranmusic.com is my website. And you can find me on all the different social medias, at John Kiernan Music on everything except for Twitter. On Twitter, it's at JKiernanGuitar.
Awesome. John Kiernan, thank you so much for taking the time. We will be right back. Listen to this beautiful music as we go to commercial. Hi, I'm Josh Shernoff from Fight TV, and this is my action figure by Cello Toys. Now you can recreate all your favorite Josh Shernoff moments, like that time Darby Allin wouldn't talk to me, or that time Matt Cardona wouldn't give me the information I asked for. Right. Tell us, why are you here?
Well, I'm not going to reveal that information to you, Josh.
With 3 points of articulation and a realistic scale when next to non-retro style figures, and an astonishingly unrealistic scale when next to your favorite Hasbros, hey, who put that snake on me? Get the Josh Shernoff Fight exclusive action figure by Cello Toys. Available now at SoSaysShernoff.com. That's our show. Thank you again to John Kiernan for taking the time to talk with me and just talk about wrestling music and music in general. I think we all learned a little something here. I'm going to have to dust off my guitar and get back to taking some lessons. We will be back next month. Stay tuned for a continuation of this. Next week, right here on Fight, Talking with Friends is going to continue this topic of music and professional wrestling. Talking with Friends, of course, is where I go from talking on a show like So Says Shernoff and just giving my opinions and just talking to people in the know It's when I talk to my friends, just like all of you would, where you sit down and you talk to your buddies and say, hey, what is your thought on this? What are your memories of this? What are your favorites of this specific topic? And of course, that's my brother, Fred Shernoff, Matt Mangle, and Calvin Tan. Talking with Friends is available here on Fight, and you can also go to So Says Shernoff's YouTube channel, youtube.com/So Says Shernoff, and that's where you'll be able to find previous episodes as well of Talking with Friends. So definitely check that out as we will continue this conversation about music in professional wrestling. Also, make sure if you want to watch this and Talking with Friends early, go to patreon.com/So Says Shernoff. Join that Patreon. Also, if you haven't gotten the Josh Shernoff action figure, what are you waiting for? They're flying off the shelves. And with that, I want to give a thank you to the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast, who had me introduce their show, their post-WrestleMania show. That was really cool. That was a lot of fun. And they're just enormous fans of my action figure. And they said, hey, it's our favorite figure of all time. We need to have you on here to introduce the show. But honestly, that was a blast. And I look forward to doing some more stuff with them. They're here on Fight too, so check them out. This has been So Says Shernoff, because all of that is what Shernoff had to say. See you next time.